Hey everyone, welcome to the Live Long podcast, where we are going to discuss how to live a longer and better life. My name is Erin Hunter, and I am the senior editor here at Live Long Media. Today, we're joined by Juliana Schroeder. She's an award-winning professor in the management of organizations group at the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. A great mouthful. I love it. Juliana is an expert on the mind. As a behavioral scientist, she studies how we think about how other people think. So, this underlies every decision we make and how we carry ourselves in the world. And it's something I'm so excited to explore today, especially through the longevity lens. And just a quick addition, she is joining us for the Live Long Women's Health Summit in April, which we are so excited about. It's going to be amazing. She's going to join an incredible lineup with Jane Fonda, Dr. Vonda Wright, Dr. Stacy Sims, and incredible advocates for women's health. But without further ado, I want to welcome Juliana to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this conversation.
It's going to be awesome. And I want to start by asking you what you think I am thinking about right now.
I think that you are thinking about the next question you're going to ask because most of the time when you're talking to someone, they're thinking ahead a little bit and rather than being listening and fully in the moment. But hopefully you're fully in the moment, but who knows? You could be thinking ahead.
Is it true that we can't have more than one thought at a given time?
I don't know if I would put it that way. I would say that we're kind of cognitive misers and our attention is like a spotlight. And so in that sense, maybe it's sort of sequential like one at a time, but I don't know. We're also easily distracted. There's a lot of things in our heads or things going on. And so I think you can have stuff in the back of your mind as you're like, I wouldn't say I have just one thought even right now. Like there's multiple things that are happening in my mind right now.
So most of it we wouldn't even know about. We're just even thinking conscientiously, what was the conscientious thought I'm thinking about?
Yeah, there might be one at the forefront and there's one that but I think there can definitely be stuff in the background for sure.
I wanted to ask you that because based on the conversation today, but also the to me it seems like our interpretation of what others think about us, it errs to me on the side of mind reading. Not that it's necessarily like the woo-woo type of mind reading, but we tend to do this as humans where we want to know what other people are thinking. And I really first just want to break down why do we do this? Why are we biologically attuned to caring what other people are thinking, whether it's about us or about how they see the world?
Yeah, well, exactly. We are evolved to live in social groups. We are social animals. That is a big part of what makes humans humans. And as part of that, we are constantly engaging in what you called mind reading. And that is kind of the term that we use, even though sometimes that's confusing to people. But essentially, we're always trying to figure out what's in other people's minds, and we're judging people. We're mind judging and mind perceiving all the time. And as humans, we are pretty good at this because we have evolved to do it. And it's kind of like amazing because it's all this inferential guesswork that we're doing. So, we are applying stereotypes and like, high level beliefs that we have about the world and the environment and things. When I, immediately see you, I draw immediate inferences. You are a woman and you're white. And, there's all these things that I immediately, you look young. And so that's already I'm forming an impression of you. And that's what we call kind of like the top down belief structure. And then at the same time, I'm actually talking to you. And so I can see you nodding your head and you're giving me these cues. And so that are what we call like the bottom up cues are also informing me and changing the way I think about your mind. And as I'm forming an impression of you and trying to understand you and building a relationship with you, I'm kind of putting all this together in my mind to do these things. And so I'm integrating all these different cues at once to come up with an impression of you.
Is this all a snapshot moment that happens, or is it something that gradually happens over time the longer you're in someone else's presence?
That's actually such a good question because as scientists, we're trying to get a better sense of the time trajectory of this. And a lot of research has focused on that first impression. And a lot of that was actually done. So, like Alex Todorov, a lot of this was done with like face perception because it was kind of easy to do studies like this. So you could show someone a photo of a person's face and, or just see their full body or, see a video of them. Or we did talk about thin slicing, like a 10-second silent video clip. And what's amazing is that, people form a ton of impressions, like right away, after just 10, 5 seconds, even less, 2 seconds of seeing you. And it can be silent. I'm already like, oh, I think I know kind of who you are. I have like a whole sense of you. But, at the same time, of course, we're going to update that. Once I start to have a real conversation with you, actually, I'm really interacting with you. I have these first impressions. They are sticky. We do anchor on them, but I'm also going to update over time. And that updating process is something we're actually really trying to get a handle on right now. Like, how quickly do we update? How sticky are those first impressions really? Say I turns out my stereotypes are totally wrong. Everything I thought about you when I saw about you were completely wrong. How hard is it to kind of transform that first impression? And what is that time trajectory? How long does it take? And how much countervailing information do I need if I thought, oh, you don't, you seem brilliant, and then it turns out you're not quite as brilliant or something, how does that update? And so, it's basically an open question, but I would say that in general, we have found that information that comes earlier is stickier, and informs information that comes later. So there was like a really famous study that was done a while ago where you could just have you learn traits about a person. So they're punctual, they're good natured, they're moral, they're upstanding, they're honest. But then also those are all good things, pretty much. And then, you could also learn bad things about them. They are, they miss their kids' soccer games, or they, just different things, like things that are worse. Like sometimes they cheat on their taxes, and so
That is what I hope they don't. That is a personality trait I hope they don't have.
but you can imagine like the order that you learn that information really matters. So that was the experiment essentially. They manipulated. So first you find out the good things and then you learn the bad things versus first you hear that they cheat on their taxes and then later on you find out that they're punctual. And of course the order, like you can imagine, you come up with like a completely different impression of who this person is depending on how you're presented with the information. And that was, very stylized and, you're just learning adjectives. But that is true for every interaction we have in our life is like the order in which we find out information matters, and the stuff that comes earlier is more important than the stuff that comes later. So this is why everyone says first impressions matter.
And there's so much to unpack there, but like the one thing when it comes to health I think about is someone starts a diet. So maybe if you're new to learning about health and longevity and aging, is it often that maybe the first studies and the first diet you come across where it's like, oh, that piques my brain? Are you more likely maybe then to fall in the camp of this is right, everything else is wrong? So let's say someone does keto, and because that's the first thing they learned about, is keto going to be more sticky in your brain, let's say, than someone who's like, oh no, actually do, or vegan, or actually do paleo, whatever you name it.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. So in this sense that, if you learn it first, it sort of anchors you a little bit. But at the same time, I would have to think through that a little bit because if you have like a big failure right away, maybe that's the thing. If you tried keto and it like really didn't work, for you, that might stick in your mind as well. So I'm not sure how it would apply in that sense.
So socially, because a lot of this has to do with how we interact with other people and
Yes.
impressions. Why does this inferring and projected mind reading, how does it impact my brain and my social health and my physical health? Like, is there a relationship there?
Yeah, well, so one thing that we found in our work is that, even though I did say, in a sense, like as humans, we are good at mind reading. And I think, some people have even said like it's our superpower. And that's because compared to other animal species, we are one of the best. So, there's been studies that suggest that our closest like primate um, companions, like the chimpanzees and the orangutans, that by about 2 years of age, a human has more social intelligence than fully grown chimpanzees and orangutans. Whereas, physically they're still not up to par, but socially, like already they're like way surpassing on any social test that we can possibly think of, any sort of mind reading task. There's one that's been used called the false belief task. So this is like an early being able to understand that people have different theories of mind and different perspectives. We as humans, we kind of take for granted to some extent that, of course, like other people will have different perspectives than we do, but at the same time, sometimes it's a little hard to get outside of our own perspective. But so, like, this is a test that they do with kids where they would, it's very simple. They basically say, an object was put by one person into a box. And so it's in the box. But if there's another person that came into the room, they won't know it's in the box, right? And so the kid has to like, recognize that the other person doesn't have the same information that you have. And so that would be like a false belief type task. So that's a classic one that, again, humans can really surpass like chimpanzees and orangutans like right away at these types of tasks. So humans are good in that sense. But on the other side of it, we often misread people. And that's like basically I've built my entire career on studying all the ways in which we are what we call like socially miscalibrated. And when we misunderstand people and misread people and how that can harm us and our social health. And one thing that we found is that there's something that sort of seems like a really systematic consequence of some of this misreading, which is what we call like under-sociality, which is that people are not as social as they could be for even their own good. So if you even think about their own well-being, you don't even have to think about other people and like positive externalities, just think about them. You could be more social in a way that would be helpful for you, and people tend not to be as social as they could be. So this is things like there's a whole class of situations like talking to strangers, engaging with people who disagree with you, doing pro-social gestures like calling up an old friend or giving someone a compliment or showing gratitude, things that like you think like maybe could be good for you and good for other people, but people sometimes hesitate to do for all these reasons. There's a lot of psychology behind it, and some of it is that they don't realize how much the other person might appreciate it. That's part of the psychology. And so these things become like barriers, and it makes people less social than they could be. So I actually have a colleague, Nick Epley, who's writing an entire book on this. He's calling it a little bit more social because we don't want people to like think, oh, I need to go out and be hypersocial all the time. You don't want to overdo it. But I think, on the margins, we've identified a bunch of different types of contexts, like when you're in public transportation, you're sitting on the train and like there's nothing else to do, but like you could turn to you could go on your phone, which is like a terrible distraction. I'll talk about that in other ways soon. Um, but you could turn to the person sitting next to you and have a nice conversation. People
How do
like
you
never
how do
think about
you
doing that.
how do you invite that conversation though? If you've been telling yourself for so long, "Oh my God, they don't want to talk to me. No one wants to talk. No one's this." So you're projecting that onto them. If that's been you your whole life, how do you all of a sudden be like, "Okay, I'm just gonna like talk to people?" Because that seems so stark, doesn't it?
Yes. So talking to strangers is something we've studied like at length. So I can go really deep on this topic if you're interested. Um, but there are a lot of barriers. But one of the big ones, like you mentioned, is even just the start of the. So people also worry about the end of the conversation. They worry about everything in the conversation, but the start of the conversation is a big barrier. And part of it, like you said, is that people tend to think that the other person might not want to talk to them, right? Because you don't want to impose, right? People don't want to be busy, but they don't want to be like that person that like, is annoying and starts the conversation, because that's another thing about, so there's something we call pluralistic ignorance, which is that people want to abide by what they perceive to be the social norms. And so if you're in a context where other people don't seem to be interacting, you assume that like sometimes you misattribute that to their internal beliefs and disposition. So if nobody's interacting, it could be because that's kind of a norm. Why did that norm even start in the first place? We can, who knows? But it doesn't necessarily mean that nobody wants to talk, right? But people assume that it means nobody wants to talk. And now we have technology on top of this. So people put in headphones, which makes it worse. Because, of course, if someone's wearing headphones, like you would never talk to them. Like clearly they're probably in a very important call or something else. They're listening to music. It's incredibly important. You can't interrupt that. And so it just basically creates all these barriers, and it is hard to think about overcoming them. You almost need like a cue from the other person that they're open, right? And so like even subtle cues, like they make eye contact, they smile at you, you can sort of signal that you're open. And this is something that people can think about doing too if they think it's too much for them to start a conversation. This all comes down to like social bravery and social courage. And it's hard to start a conversation, especially now when a lot of technology is starting things for us. Like I have undergraduate students and they don't know how to ask anyone out on a date because it's all going through the apps, right? They're like,
It's
oh, that's crazy to think about doing that in person. I'm like, it used to be that we did this in person. And, starting a conversation, same thing. Like we ran these studies where we were asking people to talk to cab drivers. So this was back before Uber and Lyft, like when people were actually in cabs. Now in Uber and Lyft, it's like, well, shouldn't there be like a button you can press where like it'll signal to the driver that you want to talk? And actually, we've talked to the apps about potentially building stuff like this in, but it's crazy that you feel like you need that, in order to start up a conversation. So, again, if you feel like you cannot start the conversation yourself, maybe you can try just signaling to people that you're kind of open to it. It might not be
mm,
enough though, because someone does have to make the first move. All right. But, the funny thing is that, again, when people are worried about the start of the conversation, beyond the other person not talking to them, they get caught up in their mind. So that's one mechanism. But another thing is that they're concerned about their competency. I won't know how to start it. I won't know how to continue it. Like it'll be awkward. I don't know how to have it. It's like almost like I don't know how to have a conversation, which is hilarious because like we do know how to have conversations. And
so
we have experiments where we basically give people like simple icebreakers. Like try asking that, saying, "Hi, how are you doing today? What do you think about this weather we're having?" Like, we give them the simplest, stupidest, icebreakers, and that's enough to be like, "Oh, okay, yes. I remember how to have a conversation and like I can do it." It's like gives people like a little bit of leverage to get started.
and that's so interesting because relationships are so paramount for living a long and healthy and happy life. There's a lot of research that you talking to people and being open, like openness as a character trait, extroversions associated with having less disease, less sickness, like
Yes.
all these things we know are so good for our social health,
And it's
our
also
social
like
health.
it's so interesting to think about the full life cycle of our social lives, and your close relationships are important, but every close relationship starts with a conversation. You have to start somewhere. Like how do you think relationships build and develop, right? So that's important.
So is part of the key here then to start building more relationships and even to start building better relationships with the people in your life is the key to change then how you think they think about you.
I think that is part of it. I think that is part of it. We call that the meta perception. It's like how are they thinking about you? And I think it's more than that. It's like knowing even your own mind. So for example, we have people predicting what it would be like to talk to a stranger. And so this is some of our earlier studies. We had people making predictions about, yeah, what it would be like to talk to a stranger on the train or in other types of, public, like in waiting rooms, in the line at the grocery store, on a plane, on a cab, and people tend to think this is in America. The people tend to think that it'll be negative, that it won't be pleasant. And again, they're really thinking about that start of the conversation. It seems scary. They often think the other person won't want to talk back and so on. But then when we actually make them do it in experiments, they almost always say that it's more pleasant than sitting in solitude or just doing what they would normally do, which is often not talking, right? So, it turns out to be a lot more pleasant than they expect. So that's a sense where they maybe don't understand other people, but they also just don't understand kind of what their own experiences would be like in their own mind, right? And so, you know, and it's interesting to think about too, um, you know, kind of this whole line of things where it's like we don't fully understand what can be good for us in our social lives, right? Because there's a little bit of a trade-off between efficiency and convenience and doing the thing that feels a little bit hard. Like it's easier to just scroll on your phone, and you could call someone on your phone, but that's also kind of, you could text them. It's a little bit easier than calling. And so we think about like a whole social spectrum. So it's whether, all these decisions that you make in your everyday life. Do I talk to the stranger or not? Do I, when I decide to talk, how long do I talk? How deep is the conversation going to go? Is it going to be superficial or is it going to go deep? And, even like with longer, closer relationships, like people that you've known for years and years, family members, how do I want to reach out to them? Like, am I going to call them or am I going to see them in person or am I just going to text them? And again, it's all like some things feel easier than others, right? Like it's easier not to talk to a stranger. It's easier to send that text rather than like actually calling or like doing the video chat or seeing them in person. But what we find is that sometimes like putting a little more effort and showing a little more of that social bravery can really pay off because you get so much of a better, richer, more real interaction, right? And we're just starting to do research on this, lots of people are. Now we have AI companions. Mark Zuckerberg famously said, let's all have some AI friends. Like, that's great. We're going to have that in the future. I mean, maybe there are parts of that that can be good, but you have to really be concerned about substitution, where it's like, yeah, it's so nice and easy to talk to an AI companion, and I can craft, replicas building a huge profitable company off of this. I can craft, the perfect person, and I made an avatar, and it looks exactly the way I want, and we can have, I don't know, they're there to serve me. We kind of have this, we call it the empty vessel phenomenon. People like when their relationship partners are kind of like serving them and supporting them. And this is like it on steroids, like I think AI companions are like the ultimate empty vessels. They're there to be filled by you. But it feels nice and easy. You're losing something, right? And you're losing something really real. And that's something I'm happy to talk with you about, Erin.
So I'm definitely hearing that having quality relationships and having more of that social bravery has to do with effort. So what you put in is what you get out. And even though it's a little bit more effortful to go up to a stranger and be like, hey, you have a really cute dog, or to give someone eye contact, just these simple cues, but it's more rewarding psychologically, and that could have a ton of good benefits, and it could really benefit your life and help you live a more full life, really.
Yeah, I think, when you think about any type of potential social interaction, you actually want to start thinking about how can I enrich it? How can I make it richer and better? And how can I get deeper? And it's like, how are we really going to build intimacy in like a real way? And it's nice to have these like short conversations with strangers that kind of brighten your day and build the community. But, ultimately we want to be like building like real deep relationships with people that will be there for like the rest of our lives. And we want to have
So
rich social lives. And
Can
so
I
it's
pick your
talking on the
brain really
phone.
quick?
Yeah, of course.
How do you build deep relationships? You are immersed in this subject. This is your bread and butter. What would you do if you were to come up to someone who's a hermit, who's just got out of 8 years in the woods, and they're like, I'm ready for deep relationships. Okay, what do I do? How do I think about this? What do
Yes.
you do?
And I would say that, you I am a socially anxious person, which, and like a lot of people are, and I think that's becoming, more and more common. And when you say, a hermit, I think I would actually have a very different set of recommendations for them than me, because I think you have to build up to a lot of these things. So that question is a
Mm.
little bit tricky, actually. But for me, I think about things like kind of on the margin of like how my research has changed my own life is times when I like wouldn't have considered, I don't even think about social experiences when I'm on the train. But now I think, oh, like it does come to mind, like it's possible that this could be a moment for having a social connection. And you kind of have to be open to letting it happen. And even I think I have another line of work on like service providers. And it's kind of like people that you put into a different category. Like you don't think of them as relationship partners, like the person who takes out my garbage and like my faculty assistant. And, I see them actually pretty regularly, but I don't think about them as relationship partners. I think it's interesting to like consider like opening up a little bit and like, hey, these are like people that you see almost every day. Like maybe like think about forming a little bit of a relationship with them. Like I actually started talking with the person who takes out my garbage, and he's like fascinating. He's so interesting. He has like an amazing, like
Coolest
really
guy.
cool life. And I just wouldn't have thought about that before I started doing this research. So there's that. And then also, all these like little social decisions that we make about, again, like my mom. I try to, she lives across the country. She's in Virginia. I do try to connect with her as much as I can, but it's really hard. And it used to be that I would, I try to send her a text, but I'm like, you know what? If I have 5 minutes, I'll give her a call. Like I will pick up the phone, and because you learn so much more and it's so much richer, than a text. And I will say that some of the features that we found in the research that really matter for conversations is synchrony. So how quickly you can kind of go back and forth. And because with any type of writing, it's just pretty asynchronous. Even, texting, which is like relatively more synchronous, like you can go back and forth. There's going to be pauses, sometimes long pauses. You don't know. There's ghosting, there's inadvertent ghosting. The person doesn't respond. You don't know why, right? They just got busy. So many things can happen, and you're not really getting like a full picture of what's going on with them in that medium, right? Whereas with voice, I can actually hear you respond right away. And that's giving me so much of a richer picture of like you and what's happening with you. And then there's synchrony, and then the voice itself. So what we call like the paralinguistic cues, all the things, all these cues, all these things that come into our semantic content and make it richer. So there's the words. The words are great. That's, language is incredible. It's useful that we have language. The words themselves are great. But then in addition to words, everything I'm doing with my voice is like really adding a lot of mind into the words. So in addition to what I'm saying, you can actually hear kind of what I'm thinking as well. Like, and what's great is you have a tone of voice that means something to you. Like, I'll be sarcastic or I'll be funny. And it turns out that like more complex intentions translate worse when you don't have those paralinguistic cues. So sarcasm and humor are like paradigmatic examples where if someone's being sarcastic in writing, it's like it can be really hard to tell, and we're trying to update the written medium by platforms and things to try to add more of that. Like that's why we have emojis and memes and like you can try, but it's just not as good as voice, None of it is as good as voice yet. And I don't think it will be for a while, and so that is another thing that matters a lot.
So, it's sort of as we wind down here, then something that I'm keep thinking about when you're talking about all these other cues that not only tell me who you are, but it also helps me think about how you think. Does that imbue more trust if you're doing more things with your body? When I think about how you perceive myself and others, does that make you seem like someone who's more interested in what I have to say or more trustworthy, someone who deserves attention and someone who deserves, like, who's curating connection by doing other things?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think that's the right way to think about it. So we have a lot of studies where we look at, let's just take that, speaking versus writing. We randomly assign people to speak or write with others. And when you speak, you have more information. So you can learn more about like, are they really trying to be sarcastic or funny? You have more of what we call like empathic accuracy, which is like you're more accurate in judging what the other person was intending to convey based on the other person's stated intentions when you hear speech. So that's the accuracy piece. But in addition to that, what's cool is like you also have just higher impressions of them overall in general. So on average, you tend to think of that person as being more thoughtful, more emotional. So we've done this like with job candidates. Like imagine making a pitch to an employer about why you should be hired. It's like an elevator pitch, like the spoken version, or like a kind of a cover letter, like the written version, right? And so you could even have, and we've done this in our experiments, you could keep the words exactly the same. It's just you hear them from the candidate's own mouth, or and you could just do the audio. You don't even have to see them, just the audio, or you read them. And what you find is that this even the same words recruiters actually judge them more positively. They think of that candidate as being more thoughtful and sort of more human-like. It's kind of humanizing, right? Than when they read those same words. And that's because not only is the voice giving you insight into their actual mental states, like what they're really thinking and feeling, it's giving you kind of like reminders that they are a thinking and feeling person. And like what's kind of amazing what we find in our work is like without those reminders, you kind of like forget. Like your baseline is like kind of low. Like people don't like another way to put it is like when people like read these cover letters, they're not kind of like reading it in the same way that the candidate themselves would have spoken it. You know, it's like you kind of like don't imbue it unless you know the person
Right.
well, you don't imbue it naturally with the kind of mindfulness that the person would have done, you know. So that's why you would need to hear the voice to like kind of get that reminder, and it's kind of humanizing just in and of itself.
Wow. It's fascinating. And it really goes to show that it's all the little things that can really contribute to enjoying the human experience of connection more, you know? And
Yeah.
I think what I just love is if after this conversation here, if you could wrap up just like two or three things that people can do like right now based on what we talked about to just start to facilitate more of those meaningful conversations, but also make sure our little brains up here aren't like tricking us and making us think that other people are against us. It's like me versus them, you know?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, what I understood from what you said is that we're wrong. Like sometimes
It
we're
can
wrong in our
be.
own brains and we're wrong about them. So like what can we do to start, convincing ourselves that it's worth thinking differently, I guess.
Yeah, I think you know, I would encourage what I call kind of like social bravery or social agency, which is like really you are in control of your social life. And so that means, you know, you could be the one to take that first step, like whether it's talking to someone or making the relationship go deeper and going more intimate or, you know, having the richer social experience when that's, you know, going to be speaking rather than writing. You know, those are all things, those are all choices that you can make, right? And someone has to make them. And, you know, that could be you can be the lead. And this is like complemented by this idea of social reciprocity, which is
Mhm.
that so what people don't, I think, always think about is that so much of how a social interaction is going to go depends on them and what they do. And you can lead it off because people reciprocate. So if you smile at someone, they're way more likely to smile back, you know. And if you make eye contact, they're like, you know, and you say hi, it's almost impossible for someone not to say hi back. You know, that's just human nature. And you know, you so essentially you can really drive a lot of how a social interaction will go because people do tend to reciprocate what you're giving to them, right? And I think, you know, Oprah puts it, the energy that you put out in the world is going to come back to you, right? And that's really true in a social sense. And the research really, you know, really shows it. And so that's, I think, the thing I would love to leave people with.
I learned from another connection expert on this podcast that I should end this talk with you by saying something along the lines of, I can't wait to talk to you again. Or it was something like
Oh,
that,
nice.
where I'm telling you and I'm conveying to you that this was great and I want it received back to me. Is
Yes, that really highlights, like I teach persuasion. That highlights what we call like the principle of reciprocity, which is like, you know, you want to create a long-term relationship. And so like we talk about things where it's like if you're going out for drinks, like you should pick up the tab and then be like, you can get it next time. You know, it like basically signals that, you know, first of all, you want to do stuff for the other person and you want to get the relationship to keep going. So like that's a beautiful
Mm,
example of that. Yeah.
yeah, all right, good deal. Thank you so much for joining us because I actually think, oh my God, there's so much to talk about in this, and we scratched the surface, but I think people got some really fabulous takeaways, and there's a lot to understand about the way we perceive the world and how we can be the chess players of conversations and guide it in that
Yeah, the
way.
architects maybe. I love that. Yes.
That's
Wonderful.
amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. A
Thank you for
pleasure.
having me. Yeah, this was fun.